Jordan Hale moved into Birchwood Heights on a bright Sunday morning. The neighborhood was a picture of suburban perfection, with manicured lawns, freshly painted houses, and the faint smell of jasmine floating in the air. Every hedge looked as though it had been threatened into submission, and every driveway gleamed like it had been scrubbed by obsessive hands. Jordan inhaled deeply, appreciating the calm she had sought after years of working in intelligence. Peace was rare for her, but this move represented a fresh start, a chance to escape her past life filled with danger, secrets, and constant vigilance. She had lived under code names, traveled to foreign deserts, and faced adversaries that ordinary people could not imagine. But in Birchwood Heights, she hoped for normalcy, or at least as close to it as someone like her could manage. She stepped out of her black Escalade, the soft spring sunlight bouncing off the polished surface. Her loose curls framed her face, and her oversized sunglasses shielded eyes that had seen too much. A simple gray hoodie and black leggings completed her ensemble, practical and unassuming. Jordan carried her suitcase up the stone walkway, savoring the serene sounds of birds and sprinklers. Everything felt almost idyllic, yet she sensed the scrutiny of the neighborhood hovering like invisible watchers. She had been warned before moving in that affluent suburbs often had two types of residents: the wealthy and those who fancied themselves the guardians of propriety. Jordan's interest was neither money nor social status. She simply wanted a quiet life. Her peace was shattered the moment Karen Whitmore appeared. Karen, with her helmet-like blonde hair and pastel sweater, marched across the yard, her face taut with self-importance. She squinted at Jordan, suspicion radiating from every pore. "Excuse me," she barked, marching up the walkway as though Jordan were an intruder in some hostile territory. Jordan offered a polite smile. "Good morning," she said calmly. Karen's lips tightened. No, don't good morning me. Who are you, and why are you entering that home?" Jordan raised an eyebrow. She glanced down at the deed papers sticking out of her folder and replied, "I live here." Karen's scoff was audible. "You live here?" she said, as though Jordan had admitted to robbing a bank. Karen's eyes darted between Jordan's car and her face. "This is a secure community," she hissed. "You can't just walk in here like you own the place." Jordan breathed slowly, letting her tactical training keep her calm. "I do own it," she replied simply. Karen's jaw tightened. "Oh, really? Show me your ID," she demanded. Jordan let out a small laugh. "Ma'am." "No." Karen's face turned red, a mix of entitlement and disbelief. "The audacity," she muttered. "I'm calling the police." Jordan shrugged and stepped inside her own home as Karen whipped out her phone and theatrically dialed 911. She narrated the situation with dramatic flair, clearly aiming to paint Jordan as a threatening figure. "Yes, 911. There's a suspicious woman trying to enter a house," she said. "Yes, she's African American, and she refuses to show ID." Jordan closed the door, listening to Karen's performance echo across the street. Within minutes, police sirens announced the arrival of law enforcement, lights flashing through her windows. Jordan calmly walked outside, deed and ID in hand, and presented them to the officers. After a quick verification, they nodded and left, leaving Karen fuming and utterly humiliated. As Jordan settled into her new home that evening, she unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, her mind alert to every detail. Karen had shown her hand immediately, hostile, entitled, and racially motivated. But Jordan was unshaken. She knew the neighborhood would try to test her, to see if she could be intimidated. But what Karen and the HOA could not know was that Jordan Hale was not an ordinary resident. She had spent years working for the CIA, handling threats far more dangerous than a petty suburban bully. Karen's calls, her threats, and her pettiness would soon collide with someone who understood strategy, consequences, and control. Jordan allowed herself a small smile as she whispered to herself, "Welcome to suburbia." The next morning, Jordan woke to sunlight spilling into her kitchen, painting the marble countertops in gold. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sipped slowly, enjoying the brief calm of her new home. For the first time in years, she felt almost normal, almost untethered from the constant tension that had defined her life. But Birchwood Heights had a rhythm of its own, one where newcomers were scrutinized and judged, especially those who did not fit the neighborhood's narrow mold. Jordan had already encountered the first warning signs of this scrutiny in the form of Karen Whitmore, and she knew it was only the beginning. By mid-morning, another confrontation was inevitable. Jordan had barely stepped outside to water her garden when Karen appeared again, this time accompanied by 2 HOA board members. They carried clipboards and wore expressions of self-importance that Jordan found both amusing and predictable. Karen marched up the driveway like a commander inspecting the ranks of her army. "We need to confirm that you're the legal resident," she announced, voice sharp, full of authority she had no right to wield. "And we need to see your approval documents for moving in." Jordan remained calm, crossing her arms and leaning casually against her car. "Approval documents?" she asked. Karen nodded emphatically as though she were about to deliver divine judgment. "Yes, sweetie," she cooed, dripping with condescension. "We don't just let anyone live here." Jordan felt a flicker of amusement at her choice of words. "Anyone," she repeated in her mind, noting the racial undertone implicit in Karen's phrasing. "You already called the police yesterday," Jordan said softly, keeping her voice measured. "They confirmed I own this home." One of the HOA men coughed, clearly uncomfortable, but Karen ignored him. "Well," she said, sniffing as though Jordan had offended her sense of smell, "that wasn't enough for us. We'll see about this." Jordan let a small, polite smile play across her face. "Have a blessed day," she said, closing the door gently but definitively. She could hear Karen muttering and scribbling in her clipboard as she stormed down the walkway, muttering about powers, authority, and justice that did not exist. Inside, Jordan unpacked her boxes, placing photographs of her late father and younger brother on shelves. The memories grounded her. She typed a quick encrypted message to her former CIA colleagues. Possible harassment escalation. Monitoring. Old habits of caution and preparation remained ingrained. She wasn't worried. Karen Whitmore posed no real danger, but Jordan had learned long ago that even small threats, when ignored, could escalate. Documentation, preparation, and patience were her allies. By the end of the week, Karen's obsession had become almost comical. She would pace across the street, binoculars in hand, watching Jordan tend to her garden, water her plants, and go about ordinary tasks. Her little dog barked frantically at the fence, and Karen's husband, visibly embarrassed, would whisper apologies under his breath. Jordan, however, remained composed. She had survived real danger, real threats, and violent situations far beyond HOA drama. Karen's pettiness was nothing more than a nuisance, but nuisances still required careful attention. Jordan began documenting every incident: notes, photos, recordings, and call logs. Every phone call from Karen, every unwanted approach, every falsified complaint would be accounted for. By Friday, Jordan received another call, this time from local authorities responding to Karen's complaint of a threatening presence in the neighborhood. Jordan calmly presented her evidence, showing recordings of Karen's yelling, intrusion, and harassment. The officers sighed, recognizing the futility of another false complaint. "Court dates next week," one of them muttered, "but it seems you've documented everything thoroughly." Jordan nodded, as if this were merely another mission briefing. As the weekend arrived, neighborhood tension thickened. Karen attempted more subtle intimidation tactics, leaving handwritten notes under Jordan's door with messages like, "This isn't over," and placing small floral arrangements in the mailbox as if attempting to assert dominance. Jordan photographed every action, cataloged every movement, and maintained her composure. Nothing Karen did could surprise her, for she was accustomed to navigating dangerous, unpredictable situations where the stakes were life and death, not petty territorial squabbles. Neighbors began to notice the shift. Some greeted Jordan politely, offering smiles and small apologies for the harassment she endured. Others whispered, watching Karen's floundering attempts to maintain control. Evelyn, an older neighbor with silver hair and a kind expression, even approached Jordan in her yard one afternoon. "Hi, dear, I'm Evelyn," she said, "and I just want to apologize on behalf of common sense. That one has been a self-appointed sheriff since she moved in." Jordan laughed quietly, grateful for an ally in the quiet chaos of the neighborhood. By Sunday, Karen had escalated further, driving past Jordan's house repeatedly, watching, muttering, and recording videos on her phone. Jordan met her gaze calmly from her porch, her tea steaming in her hands. "Good evening," she said softly, as if greeting an old acquaintance. Karen flinched, momentarily startled by Jordan's composed confidence. You can't," Karen began, but Jordan simply held up a hand. "Your harassment has consequences," she reminded her gently. Karen sped off, leaving tire marks and embarrassment behind. Jordan simply smiled and returned to her tea. That evening, Jordan prepared for the court hearing that would formally address the harassment. She organized files, reviewed documentation, and ensured every record was complete. It was not the first time she had prepared for scrutiny under formal eyes, though in this case the stakes were reputational rather than life-threatening. She knew the court would demand clarity, proof, and professionalism, qualities she had perfected in her years with the CIA. Karen's theatrics, so effective in the neighborhood, would crumble under law and evidence. Jordan felt a quiet satisfaction at the thought. As night fell, Jordan stepped onto her porch, listening to the faint rustle of leaves and distant barking dogs. She reflected on how quickly small acts of ignorance and entitlement could escalate, and how easily preparation could transform apparent weakness into strength. Karen's campaign of intimidation had already failed on multiple fronts, but Jordan knew the court would serve as the final stage for accountability. She whispered to herself, a promise and a warning. "You picked the wrong neighbor, Karen Whitt Moore. This story isn't over." Court day arrived like a tense storm, with overcast skies and a subtle chill in the air. Jordan Hale dressed with deliberate care, choosing a tailored navy suit that spoke of professionalism and quiet authority. Her hair was neatly pinned, and she carried herself with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms without raising her voice. She arrived early, allowing herself a few minutes to breathe, to observe the people filing in for the hearing. The room buzzed with quiet speculation. Neighbors who had come to watch whispered among themselves, their curiosity masked as concern. Karen Whitmore entered shortly afterward, pearls glinting under the fluorescent courtroom lights, her face a mask of determination that barely concealed panic beneath. Her husband trailed behind her, exuding embarrassment and unease. The proceedings began formally, with the clerk calling the case, Hale versus Whitmore. Karen sat rigidly, convinced that her theatrics and her self-appointed authority over the neighborhood would sway the court in her favor. She clutched her paperwork tightly, rehearsing the grievances she had invented in her mind. Jordan, in contrast, sat calmly, her organized files neatly arranged on the table before her. She had brought every piece of evidence meticulously documented: phone logs, video recordings, call histories, and HOA letters. Each incident, every false complaint and threat had been cataloged and cross-referenced. When the judge asked for opening statements, Karen's lawyer rambled about misunderstandings and confusion, attempting to frame Jordan as the aggressor. Jordan had anticipated this and remained still, letting the evidence speak for itself. The first witness called was Jordan herself. She presented the documentation with clarity, walking the court through every incident with precision. She showed the recorded calls where Karen had made threats, the security footage where Karen had trespassed and approached her property aggressively, and the HOA letters that contained false accusations. The gallery listened intently, their murmurs fading as the weight of evidence became undeniable. Karen's jaw dropped with each page presented, and her husband's posture sagged, The embarrassment of seeing the truth revealed overwhelming him. The judge leaned forward, scanning the documents with interest, his expression serious and thoughtful. Then came the moment that would alter the courtroom dynamics entirely. The judge asked Jordan her occupation, and she responded calmly, "I am a federal intelligence officer, specializing in counterintelligence operations." A hush fell over the room. Whispers erupted. Karen froze mid-breath, her mouth opening in disbelief. "Federal?" she stammered. Jordan's calm voice continued, "I work with the CIA in counterterrorism and national security matters under restricted clearance." The courtroom felt as though it had collectively inhaled, the weight of the revelation pressing down on Karen like a physical force. The judge's gaze sharpened, acknowledging the significance of her words. Karen's lawyer attempted to interject, stammering, "Your Honor, this information is not relevant to the case." The judge silenced him with a sharp glance. "Relevance is defined by the context of harassment and intimidation. This establishes authority and intent," he said firmly. Karen's face turned pale, and for the first time, her confident facade cracked. Her arrogance, the very trait that had fueled her relentless pursuit of Jordan, was powerless against the weight of truth. She had underestimated her neighbor entirely, mistaking kindness for weakness. The judge continued, addressing Karen directly. "Based on documented harassment, false reporting, and intimidation, this court rules in favor of Ms. Hale. You are prohibited from contacting her or approaching her property. Any violations will be met with legal penalties." Karen's mouth fell open in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. She slumped in her seat, her pearls rattling as though mocking her. The courtroom murmured in response, neighbors sharing astonishment at the definitive judgment. Her husband exhaled, relief and shame mingling in his expression. Jordan stood, calm and composed, embodying quiet authority. She spoke softly, yet every word carried weight. "No further action is required from me," she said. "Justice has been served." The room absorbed her words, understanding that her calm demeanor was more powerful than any outburst or threat. Karen sat frozen, realizing the magnitude of her failure. She had been outmaneuvered not with anger or force, but with evidence, patience, and poise. As the court adjourned, neighbors approached Jordan with congratulations and polite acknowledgments. Some offered handshakes, others words of admiration for her composure. Even Evelyn, the silver-haired neighbor who had quietly supported her, smiled knowingly. Karen exited the courtroom in stunned silence, her steps hesitant and small, a stark contrast to the confident, theatrical marches she had performed in the neighborhood. Jordan observed quietly, noting the subtle shifts in energy, the change in perception, the acknowledgement of true authority. Outside the courthouse, Jordan allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, feeling the satisfaction of justice rendered. The ordeal had been exhausting, but she knew the lessons had been delivered. Karen's harassment had been recorded, addressed, and decisively ended. Yet Jordan also understood that true power was silent and enduring. It required no dramatics, no rage, no petty revenge. Her victory was not just personal. It was a demonstration of accountability, of the consequence of arrogance and discrimination. Returning home that evening, Jordan reflected on the week's events. She reviewed her files one final time, ensuring that every piece of evidence, every correspondence, and every record of harassment was securely stored. She tended to her garden, watering the lavender, basil, and jasmine she had planted, each bloom a symbol of growth and renewal. The neighborhood's energy was already beginning to shift. Curious whispers about the CIA neighbor circulated, but the tone had changed from suspicion to respect. Karen Whitmore's reign of intimidation had ended, and the balance of power in Birchwood Heights had been permanently altered. Jordan sat on her porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, sipping her tea and watching the soft glow of lights in nearby houses. The air was calm, almost serene, but Jordan knew the quiet could be deceptive. The victory in court was definitive. yet she remained vigilant. True peace required ongoing awareness, the same precision she had practiced for years in far more dangerous arenas. Still, for the first time in a long while, she felt the kind of satisfaction that comes not from triumph over enemies but from doing what was right, from standing firm and letting truth prevail. She whispered softly to herself, "Suburbia has met its match." The days following the court ruling were deceptively calm, but Jordan knew better than to assume the conflict had truly ended. Karen Whitmore had been humiliated, yet humiliation often breeds obsession rather than acceptance. Jordan's instincts, honed over years in intelligence work, told her that Karen would not let the loss go quietly. Indeed, by Monday morning, small signs of retaliation appeared. Flowers left anonymously on her porch with Karen's initials carved into the vase, notes slid under the door that read, "This isn't over," and subtle stares from across the street. Each act was insignificant on its own, but patterns and intent mattered, and Jordan cataloged every incident with meticulous care, photographing, recording, and filing them for future reference. Karen's behavior was increasingly desperate. She would drive past Jordan's house multiple times a day, her eyes darting like a hawk, phone in hand recording every mundane action Jordan performed. Jordan tended her garden calmly, waving politely at the neighbors who peeked curiously from their lawns. She had long since ceased reacting to Karen's antics. She knew the true power in the situation lay in patience, evidence, and calm authority. Every aggressive move Karen made only reinforced Jordan's position. Jordan understood the psychology at play. Karen was a woman accustomed to control, and the realization that she had lost it entirely left her unbalanced, increasingly irrational. By midweek, Karen escalated her tactic subtly yet persistently. She sent messages to other neighbors, attempting to rally sympathy for her grievances, painting Jordan as the aggressor. Some neighbors hesitated, unsure whom to believe, but the clarity and documentation Jordan had meticulously gathered made her story unassailable. Jordan also received calls from the HOA, now hesitant, acknowledging that Karen's complaints had been excessive and largely unfounded. The shift in perception among the community was palpable. Karen was losing not just the legal battle but also the social war she had waged so aggressively. Despite the calm exterior, Jordan remained vigilant. She reviewed every incident, analyzing potential threats and confirming that all interactions were documented and legally supported. Her phone buzzed with encrypted messages from former colleagues checking in. "All under control?" one asked. Jordan replied simply, "Minor escalation. Fully managed." The brief exchange reminded her of her past life, where subtle shifts in behavior could signify dangerous threats. In the suburban arena, the stakes were lower, but her methods remained the same: anticipation, observation, and decisive action. By Friday, the tension in the neighborhood had shifted significantly. Karen's previous allies had begun to distance themselves, uncomfortable with the intensity of her obsession and the clarity of Jordan's victory. Even her husband seemed increasingly aware of the futility of her campaign, his face pale and drawn, his shoulders heavy with embarrassment. Jordan noticed this subtle shift as she walked past Karen's house, watering her new plants with calm precision. Karen glared, but the look lacked the earlier conviction. It was edged with desperation. Jordan smiled faintly and returned inside, closing the door without a word. The weekend brought new challenges. Karen attempted to escalate the harassment legally by hiring a private investigator, hoping to uncover something about Jordan's past. Jordan received the notice calmly, reviewing the details and smiling slightly. The investigator would find nothing. Jordan's life was organized, lawful, and secure. Her intelligence work had taught her the importance of privacy, compartmentalization, and protection. Karen's attempt at intimidation was meaningless in the face of someone who had spent a lifetime operating in far more dangerous and unpredictable environments. Jordan also spent time solidifying alliances within the neighborhood. Evelyn, the silver-haired neighbor, became an ally, offering support and subtle guidance. Conversations with others gradually built a network of neighbors who, while not intimately involved, were aware of the truth. Karen's isolation deepened and her influence waned. Jordan understood that control in such situations was often as much social as legal. A network of informed observers could act as a deterrent to further harassment. As the week closed, Jordan received another minor provocation. Karen had left a recorded video message on the doorstep of Jordan's home, full of vitriol and accusations. Jordan watched it once, then stored it in her file. The video, like everything else Karen had done, was documentation for future use. Jordan felt no anger, only the calm satisfaction that came from preparation, foresight, and strategy. Karen had mistaken her composure for weakness, but Jordan had long learned that patience was the greatest weapon in situations where others overestimate their own power. That evening, Jordan walked through her garden, the lavender and jasmine in full bloom, and reflected on the events that had unfolded. The neighborhood had tested her, attempting to intimidate a woman who simply wanted peace. Yet she had responded with calm authority, evidence, and foresight. Karen Whitmore's obsession with control and her sense of entitlement had been rendered meaningless. Jordan had turned every act of aggression into an opportunity for documentation, every threat into leverage for accountability. As night fell, Jordan sipped her tea on the porch, watching the soft glow of streetlights and the subtle movement of neighbors inside their homes. Birchwood Heights was quieter now, the tension easing as Karen's credibility continued to crumble. Jordan understood that victory in such a social conflict required more than legal action. It required consistency, authority, and patience. Karen's behavior had not only failed to intimidate her, but had ultimately demonstrated Jordan's competence and composure to the entire neighborhood. Jordan whispered to herself, "This lesson will last longer than she imagines," knowing that Karen would learn, eventually, that true authority cannot be challenged by ignorance or entitlement. The next court session arrived with a sense of inevitability. Jordan Hale had prepared meticulously, knowing that Karen Whitmore would attempt one last effort to regain some semblance of control. She dressed in a simple, elegant navy suit, hair pinned neatly, exuding calm authority. The courtroom hummed with anticipation as neighbors, curious about the escalating feud, filled the benches. Karen arrived with an air of theatrics, pearls glinting, posture rigid, and her husband trailing behind, a mixture of shame and concern etched across his face. Jordan observed them without a flicker of emotion. She knew that the real power lay not in theatrics or anger, but in evidence, strategy, and composure. The proceedings began, and Karen's lawyer attempted to frame the case as a dispute over misunderstandings and neighborly conflict. Jordan's files, however, told a different story. Every false report, every recorded threat, and every instance of harassment was meticulously documented. Jordan presented them with calm authority, walking the court through the timeline of Karen's escalating behavior. She showed video recordings of Karen trespassing and yelling, screenshots of harassing messages, and call logs verifying repeated false police reports. The evidence was undeniable. Whispers fluttered through the gallery as Karen's jaw dropped incrementally with every piece of proof. Her husband's face fell into his hands, realizing that the court had seen the full extent of her actions. Then came the moment that would completely change the courtroom's dynamic. When asked to state her occupation, Jordan responded with a calm precision that silenced the room. "I am a federal intelligence officer, specializing in counterintelligence operations." Gasps rippled through the audience. Karen froze, her mouth opening, disbelief plastered across her face. Jordan continued, "I work with the CIA, handling national security and counterterrorism matters. I operate under restricted clearance, which requires precision, discretion, and constant vigilance." The weight of the revelation pressed down on Karen like a physical blow. The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued, recognizing the credibility and authority implicit in Jordan's words. Karen's lawyer sputtered, attempting to object, but the judge cut him off. Relevance is determined by context. Establishing intent, credibility, and authority is critical in harassment and intimidation cases, he said firmly. Karen's face turned an ashen shade, her confident posture crumbling under the gravity of the truth. She had underestimated Jordan entirely, assuming that her entitlement, theatricality, and social manipulations would carry the day. Instead, she was confronted with someone whose authority, experience, and patience far exceeded her own. The judge reviewed the evidence with deliberate care. Based on the documented harassment, false reporting, and intimidation, the court rules in favor of Ms. Hale. You are prohibited from contacting her or approaching her property. Any violations will be met with legal penalties. Karen's mouth fell open in shock. Her husband exhaled deeply, relief and shame mingling visibly on his face. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, neighbors expressing astonishment at the decisive verdict. Karen's theatrical confidence had failed spectacularly. Jordan stood, serene and composed, embodying a quiet authority that seemed almost tangible. "No further action is required from me," she said softly, her voice carrying through the room. "Justice has been served." The gallery absorbed her words, recognizing the power of calm, meticulous, and principled action. Karen's expression was a mixture of disbelief, rage, and helplessness. Her aura of control, built on intimidation and entitlement, had dissolved completely in the face of documentation and law. As the court adjourned, neighbors approached Jordan to offer congratulations and respect. Evelyn, the silver-haired neighbor who had quietly supported her from the beginning, smiled knowingly and whispered, "Finally." Karen exited the courtroom in stunned silence, her steps hesitant and small, a stark contrast to her earlier dramatic entrances. Her husband followed, sheepish and aware of the gravity of their public defeat. Jordan watched, noting the subtle shifts in energy, an unspoken acknowledgement that authority and truth could not be ignored or manipulated. Outside, Jordan took a moment to breathe, feeling the satisfaction of justice finally rendered. The conflict had been exhausting, but the lessons had been delivered. Karen's harassment had been thoroughly documented, addressed, and decisively ended in a public forum. Yet Jordan remained vigilant. True power was quiet, enduring, and required no dramatics. Her victory was not about humiliation or revenge. It was about holding someone accountable and ensuring that entitlement and prejudice could not override justice. Returning home, Jordan tended to her garden, a physical manifestation of calm and order in her life. Lavender, jasmine, and basil thrived under her care, each bloom a symbol of resilience and renewal. The neighborhood's energy had shifted. Where whispers of curiosity had once lurked, respect and cautious admiration now replaced them. Karen Whitmore's influence had evaporated, and the subtle lesson she had learned, though she would not fully admit it, would linger. Jordan reflected quietly on the power of composure, strategy, and patience. Even in a neighborhood defined by appearances and social politics, authority rooted in preparation and integrity could not be ignored. As night fell, Jordan sipped her tea on the porch, watching the soft glow of the streetlights illuminate the manicured lawns. The subtle hum of suburban life continued around her, yet she felt a profound sense of peace. Karen's attempts to intimidate, her obsession with control, had been rendered completely powerless. Jordan whispered to herself, a promise and a warning, "You cannot challenge what you do not understand. Authority is earned, not assumed." She knew the lessons extended beyond the courtroom. Birchwood Heights had seen what true competence and calm resolve looked like, and the shift in perception would endure far longer than anyone could anticipate. In the days following the court ruling, Birchwood Heights seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Jordan Hale moved through her home with a quiet sense of satisfaction, aware that her meticulous documentation and calm composure had neutralized Karen Whitmore's public power. Yet Jordan knew that peace in the neighborhood was fragile. Karen's humiliation in court had not erased her entitlement or obsession. Subtle signs of resentment began to surface. A car idling too long across the street, whispered conversations among neighbors, and the occasional suspicious glance. Jordan remained observant, cataloging every interaction with the same precision she had applied in court. Karen's attempts at intimidation became increasingly subtle, almost imperceptible. She left notes in the mailbox with ambiguous threats, small floral arrangements that carried her initials, and even staged moments of coincidental proximity to Jordan's property. None of these tactics were overtly dangerous, but they were calculated to unsettle. Jordan's response, however, was deliberate and measured. Each note, flower, or stare was photographed, documented, and filed. She had learned from years of intelligence work that patterns reveal intent, and even minor acts, when accumulated, can create actionable evidence. Jordan's calm composure contrasted sharply with Karen's mounting frustration, making the disparity between them even more pronounced. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began adjusting to the new power dynamic. Whispers about the CIA neighbor circulated, and many residents who had previously been silent observers now began acknowledging Jordan with polite greetings or cautious smiles. Evelyn, the silver-haired neighbor who had quietly supported Jordan from the start, continued to provide subtle guidance and affirmation. Other neighbors, who had once been swayed by Karen's self-proclaimed authority, started questioning her credibility. The shift in perception was gradual but undeniable. Karen's isolation deepened with each passing day, her influence waning as her neighbors aligned, even subtly, with Jordan's quiet authority. Jordan also took the time to establish routines that reinforced her presence and security. Her garden became a symbol of stability and patience, flourishing under her careful attention. Lavender, basil, and jasmine thrived in neat rows, their growth a reflection of her meticulous planning. Jordan spent mornings tending to the plants, afternoons reviewing documentation, and evenings on the porch with tea, observing the neighborhood while remaining completely unshaken by Karen's attempts at intimidation. Each action reinforced her dominance not through confrontation, but through consistency, order, and calm authority. Karen, however, was relentless in her small-scale harassment. She continued driving past Jordan's home at odd hours, leaving notes, and attempting to create discord among neighbors. Jordan anticipated each move. She reviewed her records daily, confirming that every action taken by Karen remained legally documented. Her phone buzzed occasionally with encrypted messages from former colleagues, checking in and providing advice. Jordan responded with confidence, assuring them that the situation was manageable and under control. Karen's every effort, no matter how calculated, only served to further isolate her socially and reinforce Jordan's position in the community. Over time, Jordan noticed subtle shifts among the neighbors. Some whispered apologies, quietly acknowledging the harassment Jordan had endured. Others began offering small gestures of support, such as nods in passing or polite conversation over fences. Jordan understood that the social power of a neighborhood could be as significant as legal authority. By maintaining composure and demonstrating consistent, principled behavior, she gradually gained the respect and quiet allegiance of those around her. Karen's once commanding presence faded, leaving her increasingly desperate and alone. Despite the apparent calm, Jordan remained vigilant. She monitored the neighborhood discreetly, ensuring no escalation could take her by surprise. Karen's subtle attempts at intimidation were now more predictable, and Jordan knew exactly how to respond without overreacting. She reviewed her documentation methodically, confirming that each incident was accounted for, securely stored, and legally actionable if necessary. In doing so, Jordan transformed what could have been a stressful, chaotic experience into a controlled situation, demonstrating the effectiveness of preparation, observation, and strategic thinking. The weekend brought further confirmation of the neighborhood's shift. Karen attempted to stage a confrontation, driving up and down the street while filming Jordan in her garden. Jordan observed from the porch, tea in hand, remaining calm and composed. Karen's frustration was palpable, her hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Jordan's quiet acknowledgement, simply looking up and offering a polite nod, was enough to unsettle her completely. Karen sped away, realizing that her theatrics no longer held any power. By the end of the week, the neighborhood had clearly aligned with the reality of Jordan's authority. Whispers of gossip transformed into polite acknowledgement, and the once tense energy surrounding her property dissipated. Karen, increasingly isolated, made fewer attempts at public harassment, though she continued subtle acts behind closed doors. Jordan's vigilance never wavered, but the balance of power had shifted permanently. The lesson was clear. Authority rooted in preparation, integrity, and composure cannot be undermined by entitlement, arrogance, or intimidation. As night fell, Jordan sat on her porch, sipping tea and listening to the soft sounds of the neighborhood settling into quiet. The moonlight reflected off manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges, and the air carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine. Jordan allowed herself a rare smile, appreciating the calm she had fought to preserve. The battle with Karen Whitmore was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. The neighborhood recognized her authority, and Karen's power had been thoroughly diminished. In this subtle, silent way, Jordan ensured that peace, security, and respect were maintained, not through confrontation, but through patience, strategy, and quiet dominance. Even with the neighborhood beginning to accept Jordan Hale as the undisputed authority, Karen Whitmore refused to concede defeat. Her humiliation in court had fueled a quiet obsession, and though her public attempts at intimidation had faltered, she now sought more subtle, strategic methods to regain control. Karen's latest scheme involved hiring a private investigator, hoping to dig into Jordan's personal life, searching for any weakness she could exploit. She imagined herself finally reclaiming dominance, unaware that Jordan's meticulous preparation and intelligence training had anticipated this eventuality. Every interaction, every action, every seemingly mundane moment of Jordan's life had been planned with privacy and protection in mind. Jordan first learned of the investigator's attempt when a neighbor mentioned a stranger taking pictures from across the street. She reviewed the situation calmly, scanning the property lines and identifying the approach patterns of the outsider. Rather than confront the investigator publicly, she documented the activity discreetly, capturing photographs and videos of the individual while ensuring no legal boundaries were crossed. Jordan's training emphasized patience and the value of observation. Any hasty action could undermine her advantage. She understood immediately that Karen's desperation was becoming predictable, her tactics transparent to anyone who observed carefully. At home, Jordan continued to strengthen her defenses in subtle ways. Security cameras were reviewed and adjusted, evidence of harassment and intrusion cataloged and encrypted for future reference. Every note, every passing glance, every attempt at intimidation was logged. Jordan's home became a sanctuary, a space of order and security, not just physically but strategically. She cultivated her garden meticulously, tending to plants in a meditative routine that reinforced calm control. The lavender, jasmine, and basil grew vibrant under her care, symbols of resilience and quiet authority. Karen, growing more frustrated, attempted to manipulate the neighborhood against Jordan. She whispered to neighbors, trying to paint Jordan as an overbearing figure. However, Jordan's careful observance of the neighborhood's dynamics allowed her to intercept and neutralize these attempts. Conversations were observed discreetly, patterns of behavior noted, and the loyalty of sympathetic neighbors subtly strengthened. Jordan understood that social influence could rival legal authority in its impact, and she ensured that truth and composure outweighed gossip and manipulation. One afternoon, Karen made another attempt to unsettle Jordan. She parked her car conspicuously in front of Jordan's home, leaving a handwritten note on the windshield. Jordan approached, calm and unflustered, retrieved the note, and photographed it before depositing it in her secure files. The note, filled with veiled threats and entitlement-laden language, would serve as yet another example of harassment. Jordan's calm response contrasted sharply with Karen's desperation, further reinforcing the disparity in power. Every minor escalation only deepened Karen's isolation and reinforced Jordan's position as the composed and principled authority. The tension escalated subtly over the following weeks. Karen attempted to engage Jordan directly, stopping by during moments when she expected Jordan to be alone. Each time, Jordan's response was calm, polite, and strategically measured. She allowed Karen's frustration to manifest visibly, noting every reaction, every faltering expression, and every failed attempt at intimidation. Jordan's mastery of psychological observation, honed through years in counterintelligence, ensured that Karen's behavior was predictable and ineffective. Karen had underestimated the depth of Jordan's composure and strategic thinking, assuming that arrogance could be countered with theatrics and pressure. Meanwhile, Jordan continued to nurture her relationships with neighbors. Evelyn remained a steadfast ally, providing subtle guidance and reinforcement. Others began acknowledging Jordan with polite greetings and expressions of respect. Karen's influence waned further as her tactics became increasingly transparent and her desperation more obvious. Jordan's strategy relied not on confrontation, but on demonstrating consistent competence and calm authority, which the neighborhood gradually recognized. Karen's once commanding presence had become a source of embarrassment, further isolating her socially. By the end of the month, Karen's last attempts at intimidation had failed. The private investigators' efforts produced no useful information, and Karen's attempts to manipulate neighbors had backfired. Jordan's careful documentation, combined with her composed responses, had created a fortress of legal, social, and psychological authority that could not be penetrated by mere entitlement or pettiness. Karen's isolation was complete. Her influence evaporated, leaving her desperate and powerless. One evening, Jordan reflected on the subtle battle that had unfolded. Sitting on her porch with tea in hand, she observed the soft glow of streetlights illuminating manicured lawns. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine, and the quiet sounds of the neighborhood offered a sense of calm triumph. She reviewed her files one last time for the day, confirming that every act of harassment had been logged, every interaction documented, and every escalation accounted for. Jordan understood that the battle had not required aggression. It had required strategy, patience, and consistent composure. Jordan's final reflection of the day was simple yet profound. The measure of authority lies not in intimidation or entitlement, but in preparation, consistency, and the ability to remain unshaken under pressure. Karen Whitmore had learned this lesson, though likely unwillingly, and the neighborhood had witnessed the consequences of underestimating someone capable, disciplined, and principled. Jordan smiled faintly as she sipped her tea, knowing that the quiet, sustained power she wielded would ensure peace, security, and respect for years to come. The weeks following Karen Whitmore's failed attempts at intimidation marked a quiet but profound transformation in Birchwood Heights. The neighborhood, once dominated by whispers of gossip and subtle social posturing, began to recognize Jordan Hale as a figure of authority, competence, and calm power. The shift was gradual, imperceptible to most, but those who paid attention could see the cracks in Karen's self-proclaimed dominance. Her once fierce confidence had been replaced by hesitancy, and her efforts to manipulate neighbors were increasingly transparent and ineffective. Jordan's patience and meticulous documentation had shifted the balance, and the community was slowly aligning with the reality of her authority. Evelyn, the silver-haired neighbor who had quietly supported Jordan from the beginning, became a subtle catalyst for this change. She spoke to others privately, framing Jordan's actions not as confrontation, but as the reasonable response of a composed, principled neighbor. Gradually, whispers in the neighborhood changed from criticism of Jordan to admiration. Children waved politely when passing her home, and neighbors offered smiles and nods instead of suspicious stares. Jordan observed the subtle social dynamics, noting how the perception of power was as important as its legal or practical enforcement. Karen, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate. She attempted minor provocations, such as leaving inconspicuous notes, waving aggressively from across the street, or attempting to rally sympathetic neighbors to her side. However, each attempt only highlighted her isolation. The neighborhood, having witnessed Jordan's composure, her victories in court, and her measured responses to harassment, largely ignored Karen's antics. Even those who had once been curious about Karen's complaints now approached Jordan with subtle support, reinforcing the social shift. Jordan remained calm and composed, observing each development with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Jordan also strengthened her home's physical and digital security, ensuring that any future harassment could be monitored, documented, and mitigated. Cameras were discreetly positioned, call logs carefully reviewed, and documentation stored securely. Every minor incident, whether a suspicious vehicle driving by or a note slipped under her door, was logged and prepared for potential future legal action. Jordan's intelligence training emphasized anticipation and preparation, and she applied those lessons flawlessly in her suburban life. Karen's frustration mounted with each documented failure, her sense of control slipping further away. Neighbors began to interact with Jordan more openly. Conversations across fences became polite and respectful, and invitations to community events were extended with genuine warmth. Some neighbors quietly expressed apologies for ever believing Karen's exaggerated grievances, acknowledging the calm authority Jordan had displayed throughout the conflict. The social alignment in the neighborhood reinforced Jordan's position, illustrating that influence in a community is as much about perception, consistency, and integrity as it is about formal authority or legal victories. Karen's isolation became increasingly visible. She no longer attempted direct confrontation and instead resorted to subtle, passive-aggressive behaviors, glances through windows, whispered mutterings, and exaggerated sighs. Jordan observed these attempts with detached patience, documenting each one while ensuring they did not disrupt her daily life. The contrast between Jordan's composed presence and Karen's floundering antics became even more pronounced, further cementing Jordan's reputation within the community. One afternoon, as Jordan tended her garden, she noticed several neighbors stopping to admire the rows of lavender, basil, and jasmine she had nurtured. Conversations became casual, respectful, and friendly. The neighborhood had begun to embrace Jordan's calm authority, recognizing her as someone who could maintain both security and decorum. Karen, watching from across the street, seethed silently, her once commanding social influence evaporating entirely. By the end of the month, the transformation was complete. Jordan's reputation as a composed, principled, and competent figure had been solidified, while Karen's credibility had diminished to a shadow of its former self. Any attempt at subtle harassment or intimidation was met with quiet documentation and non-reaction, reinforcing the futility of further effort. Jordan's strategy had not relied on confrontation or anger. It had relied on observation, documentation, and consistent, principled behavior. As night fell, Jordan stood on her porch, observing the neighborhood bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine, and the quiet hum of suburban life surrounded her. She sipped her tea, reflecting on the slow, deliberate transformation that had occurred. Birchwood Heights had shifted, not because of aggression or threats, but because Jordan had maintained integrity, patience, and calm authority. Karen's isolation, once a potential source of tension, had become a testament to Jordan's effectiveness and composure. Jordan whispered quietly to herself, a reflection and a reminder. True authority is recognized not through confrontation, but through consistent, principled action. Influence is earned, and patience is its greatest ally. The neighborhood had learned this lesson, whether they realized it or not, and Jordan's quiet, enduring power ensured that the balance of respect and security would remain firmly in her favor. Despite the community's clear shift in perception, Karen Whitmore refused to accept her diminishing influence quietly. Her frustration and obsession had reached a breaking point, and she resolved to make one final, dramatic attempt to regain control. This time, her plan was audacious. She would confront Jordan directly, publicly, in a way she believed would force her victory. Karen imagined herself the triumphant victor, her theatrics dazzling the neighborhood and exposing Jordan as vulnerable. What she did not anticipate was Jordan's calm, unshakable composure and her experience in managing high-pressure confrontations. The confrontation began on a warm Saturday morning. Karen parked her luxury sedan conspicuously in front of Jordan's home and strutted onto the porch, papers in hand, attempting to assert dominance. Jordan, however, remained serene. She was tending her garden, lavender and jasmine thriving under her careful hands. When Karen approached, Jordan looked up calmly, a polite smile on her face. "Good morning, Karen," she said evenly. The simplicity and serenity of Jordan's greeting immediately deflated Karen's performative aggression. Karen wasted no time. "This is unacceptable," she exclaimed, waving papers with exaggerated gestures. "Your presence is disruptive. I demand that you—" Her voice faltered under Jordan's calm gaze. Jordan set aside her gardening tools and spoke quietly but firmly. "Karen, your complaints have been addressed in court. Harassment and intimidation are documented. Any further attempts will be considered legal violations." The firmness of Jordan's tone, combined with the quiet authority she exuded, immediately put Karen on the defensive. She had expected an emotional reaction, a fight or flare-up, but instead encountered composure and clarity. Karen's frustration escalated as she attempted to manipulate the situation further. "You can't just—" she began, but Jordan interrupted, her voice steady and unyielding. "Karen, your actions are known, documented, and ineffective. Continuing this behavior will only reinforce the legal consequences you have already been warned about." Each word was deliberate, measured, and strategically chosen. Jordan's composure contrasted sharply with Karen's escalating panic. The neighborhood, observing from their porches and windows, watched the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and astonishment. As Karen's attempts to assert control became more frantic, Jordan's demeanor remained unchanged. She moved with calm precision, a figure of authority who required no theatrics to command attention. Jordan's experience in high-pressure intelligence operations became evident. She anticipated Karen's every maneuver, countering without aggression, and maintaining total psychological control. Karen's public spectacle backfired completely. Instead of intimidating Jordan, she revealed her own desperation to the watching neighbors. The turning point came when Jordan calmly documented the confrontation. She pulled out her phone and began recording Karen's frantic gestures and incoherent demands. "This," Jordan said softly, "is part of the documented harassment." Karen froze, realizing that every action, even this final desperate attempt, was being recorded for future legal and social accountability. The weight of this realization left her speechless, her eyes wide with disbelief and frustration. Jordan's calm, methodical approach had neutralized what Karen had hoped would be her ultimate victory. The neighbors, now fully aware of the dynamics, murmured in admiration. Some whispered words of support to Jordan as she continued her work in the garden, unbothered by Karen's theatrics. Evelyn, standing on her porch, nodded knowingly. The subtle, collective acknowledgement of Jordan's authority created a social reinforcement that Karen could not overcome. Her final attempt at domination had failed spectacularly, leaving her isolated, embarrassed, and powerless. Karen's husband, witnessing the public spectacle, finally spoke quietly to his wife. His expression was a mixture of relief and shame, and he attempted to guide her away from further confrontation. Karen, realizing that her efforts had utterly failed, retreated, leaving Jordan standing calmly among the thriving garden she had nurtured. The lavender and jasmine seemed to shimmer in the late morning sun, symbols of growth, resilience, and quiet authority. Jordan's victory was complete. not through aggression but through patience, strategy, and unwavering composure. In the aftermath, the neighborhood's alignment with Jordan was solidified. Conversations became openly respectful. Invitations and casual greetings flowed naturally, and the whispers that had once fueled Karen's petty campaigns of influence disappeared entirely. Jordan's authority was recognized not only legally but socially, a rare combination that ensured lasting peace. Karen Whitmore's attempts at intimidation and manipulation had been thoroughly neutralized, leaving her isolated and discredited. That evening, Jordan reflected on the confrontation while sitting on her porch with a cup of tea. She considered the subtle battles, the documentation, the observation, and the calm authority that had allowed her to prevail. Karen's obsession, arrogance, and entitlement had been overcome not with anger or retaliation, but with discipline, strategy, and measured responses. Jordan's quiet dominance had reshaped the social and psychological landscape of the neighborhood, ensuring that respect and order would endure. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Birchwood Heights, Jordan whispered to herself, "Power is earned through patience, composure, and preparation. Entitlement and aggression cannot prevail against reason and strategy." The lavender and jasmine in her garden swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if affirming the truth of her words. The community had witnessed the subtle but decisive demonstration of authority, and Karen Whitmore's final desperate attempt had only reinforced Jordan's enduring dominance. Peace, at last, was firmly established. With Karen Whitmore's final desperate attempt thwarted, a profound calm settled over Birchwood Heights. Jordan Hale's presence in the neighborhood was no longer a point of tension, but a pillar of stability. The subtle, enduring power she wielded was recognized quietly but universally by neighbors who had once whispered and speculated. Conversation shifted from idle gossip to polite acknowledgement. Children waved when passing her home. Adults nodded or smiled in casual greeting. Jordan's influence had become an invisible, yet undeniable force, an authority established not through intimidation, but through consistent composure, documented evidence, and principled action. Jordan spent her mornings tending to her garden, the lavender, jasmine, and basil thriving as symbols of patience and resilience. Her routine became a rhythm of calm focus, punctuated by moments of reflection and quiet observation. She reviewed her documentation meticulously, ensuring that every past act of harassment, every minor provocation, and every attempt at intimidation remained catalogued and securely stored. Jordan understood that peace, once hard won, required ongoing vigilance. Her training in intelligence work had ingrained the principle that threats rarely disappear entirely. They only evolve. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had adapted to the shift in power. Karen Whitmore had become increasingly isolated, her credibility eroded by her failed confrontations and persistent yet fruitless attempts at manipulation. Her former allies among the neighbors quietly distanced themselves, recognizing the futility of her campaigns and the competence Jordan displayed. Karen's efforts, once grandiose and dramatic, had become transparent and ineffective, serving only to highlight her desperation. The social hierarchy of Birchwood Heights had been irreversibly altered, with Jordan firmly established as a figure of respect and authority. Even within her home, Jordan maintained the principles that had brought her victory. She observed, recorded, and anticipated. Subtle changes in neighborhood patterns, unfamiliar vehicles, or new residents were noted with the same precision she had applied to Karen's harassment. Her life, though quieter than the high-stakes operations of her past, retained the discipline, foresight, and strategic awareness that defined her character. The tranquility she cultivated was not passive. It was the result of active, consistent vigilance. Evelyn, the silver-haired neighbor who had quietly supported Jordan throughout the ordeal, remained a trusted confidant. She occasionally offered advice, subtle reassurance, or small gestures of friendship. Other neighbors gradually followed suit, creating a network of respect and acknowledgement that reinforced Jordan's authority without the need for confrontation. The neighborhood had learned a profound lesson. True authority is earned through composure, consistency, and the disciplined application of skill, not through theatrics, entitlement, or intimidation. Karen's presence, though still visible in occasional glimpses across the street, no longer carried the weight it once had. She made no further attempts at public confrontation, her earlier efforts exposed and rendered powerless. Jordan's documentation, calm demeanor, and strategic foresight had neutralized any remaining threat she might pose. The neighborhood had witnessed the consequences of arrogance and entitlement, and Jordan's example became a subtle guidepost for others navigating social power dynamics. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jordan sat on her porch with a cup of tea, surveying her thriving garden and the quietly illuminated streets of Birchwood Heights. The air was fragrant with jasmine, the sky painted with soft shades of twilight, and the subtle hum of suburban life created a serene soundtrack. Jordan reflected on the journey she had navigated, the court battles, the subtle harassment, the psychological maneuvering, and the careful cultivation of authority. Each step had reinforced her understanding that power, when exercised thoughtfully, could reshape both social and legal landscapes. She considered the lessons learned: patience, documentation, calm authority, and strategic foresight. Karen Whitmore's arrogance and desperation had been neutralized, not through retaliation, but through deliberate, measured action. Jordan had demonstrated that true power does not require spectacle. It requires consistency, intelligence, and a mastery of subtle influence. Her victory was a testament to the principle that respect and authority are earned through integrity and composure, not aggression or entitlement. As night fully settled over Birchwood Heights, Jordan whispered quietly to herself, a reflection and affirmation. Peace is maintained not through force, but through vigilance, wisdom, and calm authority. True respect cannot be coerced, it must be earned. The lavender and jasmine swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if acknowledging her words. Jordan knew that her careful stewardship of both her property and her relationships had ensured not only her personal security, but also the lasting integrity of the neighborhood. In the end, Jordan Hale's story became a quiet legend in Birchwood Heights, not for the drama that had erupted, but for the calm, strategic authority that had resolved it. The neighborhood had witnessed the power of patience over arrogance, discipline over theatrics, and integrity over entitlement. Karen Whitmore, once the self-proclaimed arbiter of the community, had been reduced to irrelevance, while Jordan's presence remained a stabilizing force. The balance of respect and peace had been restored, achieved through intelligence, composure, and unwavering principle. Jordan set her cup down, the tea long finished, and leaned back on her porch chair. The night was quiet, the stars twinkling softly above. The battle was over, but the lessons endured. She understood that authority, respect, and security were maintained not by fear or spectacle, but through consistent, principled action. Jordan Hale, the calm and composed CIA agent who had faced entitlement, arrogance, and harassment, had transformed her suburban neighborhood into a community that recognized and respected true authority. And with that realization, she allowed herself to finally relax, knowing that peace, vigilance, and respect would endure.